Well, if we could get our program started. My name's Tom George, and I'm the Chancellor at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and welcome to the Missouri Botanical Garden, the 2014 Jane and Whitney Harris Lecture. This is the 23rd year for this, and the endowment that supports this event was the first one established to support programs within the Whitney R. Harris World Ecology Center. I do want to give a special thanks to the Harris family for their long-term support of the center and the university, and naming this after Whitney Harris is very fitting. I want to particularly acknowledge Whitney's wife, Anna. Anna, if you could either stand up or wave your hand. She actually played a major role in Whitney's decision-making to put resources into this center. And Teresa Gallicatos, her daughter, right here. And I also want to acknowledge Liz DeLaperouse and Max McCombs, members of the Harris Leadership Council, if you could raise your hands too. And Max's wife, Molly, as well. The World Ecology Center supports one of the nation's strongest graduate programs in ecology, plant systematics, zoology, and conservation biology. It's based at the University of Missouri St. Louis, but we partner. And without our partners, we couldn't pull this off. One partner is the Missouri Botanical Garden right here. Another partner is the St. Louis Zoo, and representing the St. Louis Zoo is Ed Spavik, curator of invertebrates. Ed, are you here? There he is. Okay. And in the tradition and heritage of Peter Raven, and Pat is here as well. Thank you for being here. Former direct president of the Botanical Garden. And then on behalf of Peter Weiss Jackson, the current president, and representing the Missouri Botanical Garden is Dr. Jim Miller. He's the Senior Vice President of Science and Conservation. I'm going to bring him up just in a second to the podium. In addition to being a great partner, he is hosting this lecture. And I've got a special attachment to Jim because I was on the little search committee that brought him here. And by far, he just outshined all the other candidates. And we're just so fortunate to have Jim here in his current position. With that, I'll invite Dr. Jim Miller to the podium to take us for the next stage of this event. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That's very nice. As Tom said, I'm Jim Miller. I manage the research and conservation programs here at the Garden, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to the Garden tonight. This is a wonderful event, and I'll say more about that in a minute, but it's also a wonderful time of the year to come to the Garden. It's actually supposed to be a little warmer than it is, and we're dying for it to get a little warmer. The good news is that it's only going to go down to 43 tonight, and there are no more days projected to have a low below 45. So spring, I think, is coming. And it's turning into spring here at the Garden. Already, if you begin to walk around, there are early spring things in flower. The Garden looks nice, and we have spring events that are beginning. A week from this coming Sunday on April 27th, there's a 5K tulip trot. If you feel so inclined as to get up and show up at the Garden at 6:30 in the morning with the desire to run 5 kilometers. It could be a nice spring event. Anyway, the next few weeks will be among the nicest time of the year to visit the Garden. I urge you all, I'm thrilled that you're all here tonight to hear this wonderful lecture, but I also urge you to come back and enjoy and appreciate the Garden and everything that it has to offer. This event is about the Harris Center and its impact on conservation and conservation science and all of the other parts of science that are connected to it. It's a partnership among St. Louis institutions that's really unrivaled anywhere else in the world. The various partners bring different resources and different skills and ability together to create a whole that really is something that's very, very special. As a consequence of this, there have been students that have graduated from this program that are now out in 35 or 6 different countries around the world in real positions of influence, both in the research and conservation community in those countries, and they all got their roots here. A very good friend of mine, a woman, when I first came here in the late 1970s, who was working at the garden as a technician at the time, named Mary Fallon, got her degree out at UMSL. And Mary went on to be a very, very successful plant morphologist, married to Peter Endres, and has spent her entire adult life living in Zurich, very influential. And she now says, I get to tell people that I went to UMSL. And she's very proud of it. And it really is a earth-shattering program that we are very proud to be a part of. This is a very special night. We have Lincoln Brower here to give a lecture about monarch butterflies, and I'm going to let Bob Marquis introduce him in a moment. But I do want to say that it's particularly special to me. I have been, over the course of my career, lucky enough to spend time in the hills in the Mexican states of Michoacan and Guerrero in western Mexico, and I've been to the sites where the butterflies overwinter. And I'll tell you, it is mind-bending to see a spruce or a fir tree that has so many butterflies on it that its branches bend down under the weight of butterflies. That's a lot of butterflies, and it's really, you can't imagine it. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Bob Marquis, who is the director of the Harris Center and a professor of biology at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Bob's a long-term friend and colleague, and I'm really proud to say that last Wednesday night I was at an event at the St. Louis Academy of Sciences when Bob received the award for Science Educator of the Year here in St. Louis, a well-deserved honor. So without further ado, Bob, I want to turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Missouri Botanical Garden, and I'd like to welcome you on the behalf of the Whitney R. Harris World Ecology Center tonight. Before we get started, I'd also like to thank the support of our partners, the St. Louis Zoo, who will be hosting a video interview with the National Geographic Society tomorrow with Lincoln Brower, the Missouri Botanical Garden for allowing us to use this beautiful facility, and the St. Louis Academy of Sciences for helping us advertise this lecture. I'd like to also thank Jerry Peterson, who was the behind the scenes person for getting this thing organized and doing such a great job. This is the 23rd annual Jane and Whitney Harris Lecture. As envisioned by Jane and Whitney, this lecture series was established to bring experts in the areas of ecology, evolution, and conservation, and sometimes all three, to St. Louis. Tonight, Dr. Lincoln P. Brower will bring to us all three of these. Dr. Brower has been studying the monarch butterfly now he's in his 60th year of studying this insect. Prior to the discovery of the overwintering populations of the monarch in 1975, his research focused on ecology and evolution of the species, and he was a leader in understanding the evolution of this particular insect species and its host plant, the milkweeds. But when it became clear that intervention was needed to prevent the exploitation of the forest harboring the butterflies, he worked with the Mexican government, the World Wildlife Foundation, and local communities to establish a plan for long-term protection. As many of you are aware, it's a long-term commitment to conservation. You can't just say, we've got it saved. You've got to continue to serve, to work at this commitment. And there are still threats going on today, and he's going to talk about those. Picking the speaker for this lecture series can be a challenge, as not everyone can agree on who does the right kind of conservation and just how aggressive we should be when economics and biodiversity clash. However, everyone knows the monarch butterfly and the caterpillars. Many of you have probably reared caterpillars of the monarch butterfly as youngsters. And there's no one that doesn't like them, really. So I hope you enjoy the lecture tonight. Although migrating populations of the species are under threat, it may actually be a good thing. First, it gives attention to invertebrate conservation, which we tend to ignore insects and other invertebrates when it comes to conservation issues. They often receive very short shrift. And we also often ignore the problems in trying to save migrating species, which really perhaps are the most difficult to protect of the animal species. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Brower and to thank him for taking the time to visit us and tell us about his passion for this butterfly species. Please welcome Dr. Brower.
Thank you, Bob. That was really nice. Well, it's a great honor for me to be here and see lots of old friends and meet many new people. We had a lovely dinner with Anna and Jennifer tonight, and it is a great, great honor to be able to give the Jane and Whitney Harris lecture and to be in this beautiful building with all the different groups that are working together. It's really a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Well, as I'm going to talk about, the title of my lecture is The Grand Saga of the Monarch Butterfly. Can we turn the lights down a little bit, maybe? Can everybody hear me okay? It's okay?
A little louder.
Okay, they're going to adjust that up top. Okay, I'll assume that they're doing it. The monarch butterfly, unfortunately, has become an endangered biological phenomenon. And what we mean by that is that a spectacular aspect of the life history of an animal or plant species involving a large number of individuals that is threatened with impoverishment or demise. The species itself is not at risk, but the phenomenon that it exhibits that's so spectacular has become at risk. And to give historical examples, the passenger pigeon was an endangered phenomenon which became extinct about 100 years ago. And I can remember my grandfather telling me tales of these huge numbers of birds flying over the orchards and everywhere in the east where we lived at that time. And here's the passenger pigeon. And what is sort of scary is the fact that the distributional range of the passenger pigeon is pretty similar to that of the eastern population of the monarch butterfly. So examples of extinct of phenomena which did fail and become extinct are the great bison herds on the Great Plains. Wildebeests in Africa are endangered because partly cutting off their migration routes over extensive areas of the African continent. And the monarch butterfly, which is tightly associated with milkweed plants, as we'll talk about as we go along. Now, one of the reasons why this is such a phenomenal insect is it has one of the most complex, probably the most complex migration of any insect in the world. And in the fall, as the daylight is getting shorter and the nights are getting colder, the butterflies start migrating south up to 2,000 miles to Mexico, if you assume a straight line, and it can't possibly be a straight line. So at least 1,000, 1,500 miles getting to the Mexican overwintering sites, and then living in Mexico for 5 or 6 months. And as the March equinox approaches, the butterflies are activated to remigrate, and the 5-month-old butterflies now fly back. And as we've shown, they breed in the southern states, and then the new generation works its way up, and there are 2 or 3 generations over the summer. So if you think about this migration, the butterflies that eventually breed in this area have never been to Mexico before. When fall comes, they migrate, and they go back not only to the same areas, but often to the very same trees in a tiny area of Mexico. And to put the monarch in perspective, this is a slide showing several of the species in the subfamily. They're all called milkweed butterflies because they lay their eggs on plants that have latex in the leaves, and that serves as a protective device for the plants, but the butterflies have overcome that defense. And here's our monarch down here. There are actually 157 different species of butterflies, each of which probably has a unique and fantastic natural history. Milkweed's milky because if you break a leaf or if you bite into it, if you're a caterpillar, Latex pours out and serves the plant as a protective function. It can glue caterpillars to the leaves. And how has this evolution taken place initially? And if we think about this, here is the Tropic of Cancer. The butterflies are overwintering in the tropics. And in the spring, they're migrating into the temperate region. And the reason they're going into that region is because there's 108, at that time, 1954. This is one of my most dogged books that I own behind my desk at home. It's Woodson's book on the monograph of the genus Asclepius, and guess where that was written? Right here at the Missouri Botanical Garden. It's a wonderful book. And anyway, there are 108 species in this part of the range. And as these underwent their evolutionary diversification, the monarchs migrated with them. But because they're all temperate plants now, and they're herbaceous plants, they all die back when it freezes. So there's no food for the butterflies during the winter. So they have to migrate back into the tropics. And that probably is how the migration got going in the first place. So here we see an old female butterfly. This I took in Florida when I was at university. She's laying an egg on the sandhill milkweed plant. She'll lay 1 or 2 eggs, usually not more than that. If they lay more than that, it usually means it's a very old female or there's something wrong with it. And the reason they do that is because the caterpillars hatch out, and the first thing the caterpillar does when it hatches is to eat down its eggshell. If there's a buddy nearby, it will turn and think it's eating its own eggshell and cannibalize the neighbor, thus exerting fine population control on the butterfly population, so they don't get. So a milkweed plant generally can't support more than 1 or 2 monarchs, and so it is a means of natural population regulation. Well, in about 10 days, 2 weeks, the caterpillars go through 5 stages and become full-grown larvae, and these are brightly colored and very conspicuous because, as I talked about in my lecture today, they're really very toxic because they're poisons in the milkweeds. And I don't have time to talk about that tonight, but it's a whole other really nifty story about monarch butterflies. Well, a week later, the caterpillar walks off the milkweed plant and it climbs up on a stick or a bush or maybe on a milkweed, and it spins a little silk pad and it anchors the posterior of its body. And now the metamorphosis is taking place inside the caterpillar skin, and it sheds the skin and becomes this beautiful green chrysalid jewel, which I've often thought would be a wonderful earring if we could develop it as such. So another week goes by, and the adult develops inside the chrysalid, and it hatches out. And this wonderful insect here, this gentle creature, has the capacity to fly for 2,000 miles to Mexico and back again afterwards. Well, what I want to show you, this is a little distraction that I got involved in when I was at the University of Florida. How does the caterpillar shed its skin without falling off its silk pad? It has to split the skin on the back and wriggle out of it, and the chrysalid is forming inside here. And it wriggles, and the skin breaks in the back. Here it's wriggling, and you can see it's anchored, the hind legs in the silk pad. And here you see the skin is going up. It's broken. You can see the chrysalid inside it here. And it's holding on now with another organ, which is called the cremaster. And it has to get rid of this skin by letting go of its legs that were holding it on with the larva. How does it do that without falling off the chrysalid? Well, here you see this special organ in the chrysalid, which is barbed on the end, and it rotates that little barbed end, and it sticks it into the silk pad. And to really see it, there you see it, and here you really see it. This is a scanning electron micrograph, and what was the black post showing these little crochet hooks on it. And this is the silk pad, and this is a close-up of it. And you can see the silk pad wrap. And this is an example of how advancing technology gives you opportunities to see things that you couldn't see back in the good old days. It's one of the things that excites me about doing science is all the wonderful opportunities that keep coming up. So anyway, this just shows the marvelous adaptations of this creature in all stages of its life history. And here you can see it back in there. Now you know what's really going on when you look at this. Well, I got very involved in the chemical ecology of the monarch butterfly, and Peter Raven and I and Paul Ehrlich all started this about the same time in around 1965 or so. And but as I was getting into the chemistry and really into it, in 1976 August, the National Geographic published this wonderful article that finally nobody had a clue where these butterflies were overwintering. It was all speculation. They thought maybe it was Mexico, maybe it was they were flying all the way to South America, maybe they were hiding somewhere. And then two people working for Professor Urquhart at the University of Toronto, Kathy Brugger and her husband Ken, worked with Urquhart, and they found the butterflies up in the mountains on the 2nd of January, 1975. Well, I wrote to Professor Urquhart and I wrote to the National Geographic, and I had been in correspondence with him and said, would you please share with us the location so we can go and do some of our chemical ecology in Mexico? And the National Geographic refused to divulge the location of the area. So I started talking with a postdoc who was at the University of Massachusetts by the name of Bill Calvert. And here we are holding one of Urquhart's tagged butterflies that we found in Mexico. But anyway, there were two clues in the National Geographic magazine. One was we were huffing and puffing at above 10,000 feet altitude in the northern part of Michoacan. Well, I didn't know that much about the geography of Mexico, but we went and dug out some maps, and we simply marked every area that was above 10,000 feet in the northern part of Michoacan, and it took Bill 3 days to find the monarchs when he left Texas on the 26th of December and called me at home on the 30th of December. He had discovered the butterflies. So we immediately garnered up another expedition and headed down. And so since 1977, a lot of my research has shifted into the whole issues of conservation and ecology of the overwintering behavior in Mexico. And here you see these huge clusters of butterflies on the fir trees and the cedar trees. Here they're just flying around. We'll look at these a little bit more. Here is Bill searching for the butterflies, not finding them in that picture. And our friend who went with him, John Christian, is showing a group of Mexicans who you can tell from looking at the picture didn't have a clue where the butterflies were. So, but we gradually worked our way to the most likely spot, which is the highest elevation on the map. And it turned out that the nephew of the mayor of Angangueo, which is a little mining town in the middle of the butterfly area, knew, and on the 27th or 8th of December, took Bill up and they found the butterflies. Well, I immediately reorganized an expedition with George Lepp, who's a wonderful photographer who was then at the University of California, Davis, and my lab assistant and several of us. And on about the 22nd of January, 1977, we headed down to Mexico. We walked down through the woods, and who should we meet in the forest but Professor Urquhart, who was not pleased that we had found them. And that's another lecture I'll give you some other time. Anyway, so we worked side by side for a couple of days, and the National Geographic never told where exactly the site was. They never gave proper geographic clues. And it said the Sierra Madre. Well, the Sierra Madre, I'll show you where they are. They're at least 150 miles away from where the butterflies were found. And so we don't know whether that was a mistake or whether it was an attempt to make sure people couldn't find the overwintering site without giving them. It's really called the Sierra Transvolcanica, where the monarchs are. But anyway, I read various articles that had published, went back through the literature, trying to figure out where were the butterflies actually discovered. And I thought they were probably discovered on this range, which is called Cerro Pelon, which is one of the most beautiful mountain ranges in the world. And if I can raise $5 million, we can buy this side of the mountain and establish a research station on there. And I'm hoping that that might possibly happen in the not-too-distant future, because it's a rare opportunity to buy the last piece of private land in the whole butterfly reserve. And I hope we can carry it off. But anyway, it turns out 2 weeks ago, this picture is slightly out of focus because it's a picture of one of my pictures. And you'll notice that there's a green mark up here. Let me get back to that last picture for a second. This one is taken on the south side of Cerro Pelon, and the other picture is taken on the west face, which is just around the corner on the other side here. So let's get back to that one. Whoops, sorry. So 2 weeks ago, I was invited to come to Austin, Texas, with a meeting with Kathy Brugger, who is now a lot older than she was then, and Bill Calvert and John Christian and we held out on the floor talking to the Austin Butterfly Society. And Kathy and I have become really good buddies in the last couple of years. And I took my pointer, I put up this slide, and I gave her my pointer, and I said, Kathy, show us where you found the butterflies. And she took that pointer, and she went right up and put it right there. And this is where we have found butterflies practically every year since 1970, when they first discovered them in 75. So that was a moment of truth. It was really an exciting moment to realize that finally we learned exactly where they are. I'll come back to this picture later in another context. Well, we moved in there and camped. I moved to the University of Florida from Ames College to be closer to the butterflies and to have graduate students. And this is one of our expeditions with Mexican colleagues. We set up and lived down there. Some of my graduate students managed to stay there for 3 months at a time. And so to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about, here is the extensive breeding area of the monarchs, migrating down along the coast. Some of them probably go into the Caribbean and get lost, but most of them turn west and head down. And then most of them go along the eastern side of this. This is the Sierra Madre coming down, basically an extension of the Rockies coming down on the east side of Mexico. And here is this incredible transvolcanic range of mountains going across Mexico, and the butterflies are overwintering right here, as you'll see as we move along. And the area where they're going, the Tropic of Cancer is not sure, it's either here or here. I think it's here. Anyway, they're going across the Tropic of Cancer, and they're going up into this black forest that's shown on this map here. And it turns out that in the Sierra Transvolcanica, there are a series of 15,000-foot high mountain ranges, or a little bit less. And on the tops of these forests, from between about 10,000 to 12,000 feet, there's this rich, temperate forest, which is an OML fir forest, very much like a forest of Christmas trees. And it is to that forest that the monarchs are going each winter. And they're going into this tiny region here of Mexico and have not been found anywhere else except right here. This gives you an idea of the beauty of the forest. This is the Sierra Chincua, and this was taken from a helicopter. And you can see the very green trees are the fir trees. And lower elevation, as you come down, you pick up pine trees, and there's a mixed pine forest. A few pines up here, and a secondary moving in if there's forest loss. But here you can see the valley, and monarchs have formed their colonies in this valley every year going back to 1975, when they were first discovered. And here is an example of a 3-hectare colony, about close to 7 or 8 acres. And you can see the colonies going up here. And we have since calculated that there are 50 million butterflies per hectare. So you're looking at probably 150 million butterflies in that picture. And to give you an idea of how big this area is, I just put in the size. This is the outline of the area where the butterflies are, 3 hectares, and this is a U.S. football field. So it's the equivalent of about 6 football fields. Incredible to think that many butterflies concentrate. And basically what we're talking about here is we've since found that monarchs occur on 12 separate mountain ranges, maybe in any given year 15 different colonies on those 12 mountain ranges, and up to 1 billion butterflies in an area that's 30 by 60 miles in extent, and as far as we know, they don't go anywhere else. So butterflies that have been breeding in a million square area in the United States and southern Canada are migrating to an area of just a few square miles and really only a few hundred acres at the most on the tops of those mountains. So it really is a very special phenomenon. Here you see the butterflies coming in. the volcanic mountains in the background. This would be in early, they arrive almost exactly within 1 or 2 days on the 1st of November. And they come in droves, and the numbers build up, and they fluctuate coming in. And then and this is taken on an overcast day when the butterflies have clustered on the Oyamel fir tree. You can see the beautiful fir completely laden with the monarchs, as Jim was describing. In a cluster like this, there are probably 3,000 or 4,000 monarch butterflies, just that one branch cluster. So the density of these things and the beauty of them sitting on these trees is really an incredible sight to see. This is on, that's on an Oyamel fir. This is on a cedar tree. And on the Cerro Pelon, the clusters were denser than we'd ever seen them anywhere. It was just incredible to see how dense they were. And they also cluster on the tree trunks of the trees. And we'll see why they do that later on. So to look at these butterflies, which have flown all the way from as far north as Canada to Mexico, arriving there almost in mint condition, how do they get there and stay and maintain themselves in such good shape, flying this 2,000 miles? Well, they probably use tailwinds. Nobody's really sure, but they're probably not power flying the whole way. They're using tailwinds blowing from the north to the south and propelling them along. Between 1977 and 1982, Calvert found 9 separate areas where the butterflies were, and this is an area, a very tiny area, about 30 by 60 miles maximum, and these are the mountain tops, and these are the forests where the butterflies were found. So since then, we've found 3 more areas. This is a terrible slide. I apologize for it, but it's basically on top of a topo map, and the way we estimate the number of butterflies is as follows. We walk around the colony with a compass and a GPS unit now. We used to use a compass and a measuring tape. And we measure the colony and calculate its size in terms of the number of hectares. And what we found was, this slide is not showing, but basically what we found in those first years was monarchs on 9 separate mountain ranges, ranging from about 0.05 hectares up to 3 hectares in size. 3 hectare colony is a big one. Oh, here it is. So these are this is just to give show you the data where we calculate. There were several Chincua colonies, several others going down, and they ranged over this size from 0.1 to 3.36 hectares. 3.36 hectares, 150 million plus butterflies. Well, over the years, and I'll talk more about this slide later, the average is about 6 hectares in extent. We have good data by going around all the colonies each year, measuring the area of each, calculating the total area, and knowing how many there are per hectare. We've been able to show the size of the hectares over the years for about 21 years now, and that the average is about 6 hectares. The biggest year was 21 hectares, and 21 times 50 million is 1 billion butterflies. We know that year was accurate. We don't know why there were so many there that year. That's a mystery, remains a mystery. I think we're stuck. There we go. Why do monarchs choose these high elevation forests? Well, this is a satellite image of the area. The red spots on it are the location of the colonies over several years period. And in the next slide, we're going to see this exact same image on a moist day when the wind is blowing off the Pacific Ocean and carrying moisture towards these mountains. And all the butterflies in those pictures are bathed in clouds. So, and this time of year is the dry season in Mexico. It gets incredibly dry. And this is the way the butterflies rehydrate. Here you can see the moisture coming in through the trees. The butterfly colony is right up here. And the butterflies are soaked by this heavy fog that's blowing through, condenses on their wings, and they drink water off of each other and rehydrate. And here you can see in this picture little droplets of water. It's not particularly clear, and so the butterflies can drink from the branches or off of each other. So that's one way in which they rehydrate, and why they're going into these high mountains is so that they can access that microclimatic condensation of water. Well, one question we asked was, this shows the area where the butterflies are, and the brown area is areas that we thought they might be in. And we asked the question, where are there other colonies? There must be more colonies of these butterflies. So we engaged a group of people called Lighthawk. They're volunteer pilots who own their own planes and are really good pilots and volunteer to take people on ecological reconnaissance trips. And they flew us over the area for about 3 weeks, and we looked and searched, and I formed a liaison with a young man from NASA by the name of Dan Slayback, shown here. And here we're about to take off and search for more monarch colonies. And we flew over this area, and this is what we would see when we flew over it. Here's the Chincua colony on the west face of the mountain. To make a long story short, we spent all this time flying looking for colonies, and we didn't find a single extra one. The only ones were there were the ones that we knew were there to begin with, and we haven't found any new sites since then. So where they're going is very, very special and incredibly limited, and because of the limitation, it's very endangered because of forest degradation. This gives you an idea of a colony here. This one was 1.3, what does it say, 1.34? And here's another one. Something is sticking. There we go. This shows where that colony is in here. You can see the butterflies on the trees. If the sun is out, the butterflies are very easy to see, or they'll be flying around over the colony, and you can spot them by looking down out of the plane. It's a little tricky, but you can do it. If it's overcast, then they're harder to find. Here's a small colony. This one was only 0.2 hectares, but again, notice how dense the colony is. And the monarchs are avoiding the treetops for reasons we'll explain. There's a colony here right in the dead center of this picture. And here you can see them. And there's one here that was a very small colony, which is right in this area right here. So by doing this exploration, we determined the limitation of the distribution of these butterflies, and we'll come back to that later with conservation issues. Today I talked about bird predation of the butterflies, and I also talked about their they build up their lipids from feeding on nectar flowers, which is very important for them to have enough energy to get to Mexico, to spend the winter without feeding, and to fly all the way back into the United States on their energy reserves. Tonight I want to talk about the problem of desiccation and freezing, and how the butterflies avoid freezing. Why are they freezing? They're in the tropics. Well, first of all, the butterflies have to put up with the dry season, and this shows that these are the wintering seasons, and this is the rainfall, and this is the summer. It's soaking wet all summer long, and then it dries out. And when the butterflies arrive, it's right at the beginning of the dry season, and it becomes increasingly dry as the season wears on. And this is the pattern of the climate in that region. And this shows how dry this beautiful Llanos is. Normally during the wet season it would be covered with wildflowers, but this is underlain by lava, very shallow soil, which dries out extensively in the dry. Just to give you an idea of how dry it is. As the dry season wears on, the butterflies fly out of the colony by the millions. They fly across the Llano, and they fly up maybe a kilometer away from the colony to drink water in a water seep or a stream, along the edge of a stream, as you'll see here. Here they're coming down to drink along the edge of the stream, on the stream itself. Just tens of thousands of butterflies coming down and drinking for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then flying. Here you see a female that's drinking. You can see her proboscis there. And the body is swollen, full of water, so they fly back into the colony. They probably only have to drink this much water once during the entire overwintering season. Because if they fly out, they're burning up their lipids, and so there's a trade-off there. Rehydrate, but don't spend too much time out there flying around. Well, let's turn now. Here we are south of the Tropic of Cancer. We camping out in January 1981, and we woke up to 12 inches of snow one morning. And I couldn't believe this. And the butterflies have to deal with this snow, and thousands of butterflies were blown down. The storm lasted for 12 days and nights. And what we found was that when it clears early in the morning, then the heat just radiates out of the forest, and the temperature drops down below freezing, and the butterflies freeze to death if they're wet. So here you see a butterfly which was stranded out in the open, ice crystals, water condensed on it and froze as frost, and that will kill the butterflies. So they're right on the edge. In the year 2002, 75% of the entire population in Mexico, we estimated, was killed by the winter freeze. That was the worst mortality we ever saw. And there were places where the butterflies were up to your thigh dead on the ground beneath the oyamel trees. It was just an incredible sight. I couldn't believe it. Well, how do the monarchs deal with freezing? So one of my graduate students is here, and one of my undergraduates from Sweetbriar is here. And we've been studying the freezing physiology of monarchs. And just quickly, what this graph shows is the temperature is dropping down here, and this is time on the axis, and you have a little temperature probe in the butterfly, and you're measuring its body temperature as you lower the body temperature. And as you lower it, when the butterfly freezes, it releases heat, and the needle pops up and tells you exactly the time of death and the temperature at which it freezes. So this one froze at about -4, and this one was down to whatever that says there. I can't read it from here. But what does that say? -8? 6. So from about 4 to 6 degrees. 16, sorry. I can't read it from here. But anyway, if you look at a freezing curve for dry butterflies, dropping the temperature as in that experiment and measuring when the butterfly dies, as you drop the temperature down to -8 and come up on the graph to here, at -8, 50% of the butterflies die. And if it gets up to -15 or so, it would kill all of them, but it never gets that cold. What we found was the really dangerous situation is where you have a wet storm followed by early morning clearing when the temperature drops when they're wet. And if the butterflies are wet, rather than half of them freezing at -8 degrees, half of them freeze at -4. So they lose their freeze protection if they get wet, and that's the really, really dangerous situation. So here's a butterfly that's wet, and if it goes down to below 4 degrees, that butterfly would die for sure. And so we got really interested in the microclimate, measuring just what goes on inside this fir forest. We set up a weather station. We recorded the temperature in standard open area, and I'll show you that in a minute. And we also measured the humidity and the temperature in the forest next to the trees underneath the butterflies. And these little gizmos are called thermocron eye buttons. They're about as big as a stack of 5 dimes. And those things you can set up and measure the temperature every hour for 3 months. A little electronic, wonderful gadgetry. And the nice thing about them is you can put them out in the forest and hide them so they don't disappear. So we also put these thermocrons inside of tubes and hoisted the tubes up in the forest to measure the temperature at different heights in the forest. What this shows you is the temperature in the open area from a standard weather station, and during the daytime, during the coldest part of the year, the temperature fluctuates around maybe 17, 18 degrees. It's not freezing at all. It's just the flight threshold of the butterflies. The temperature is about right here, so they're protected from burning up their lipids by the low temperature during the daytime. But at night, that's the time that is dangerous. Practically every night in the open, it freezes and it gets down to several degrees below freezing. And then as the spring it warms up as the spring moves on. So this is the dangerous period, December and January, when frost and storms can occur. And so what we found was that being under the canopy The tree cover is like a blanket. You imagine the trees protecting the heat loss, preventing heat loss from the radiating out of the colony at night. Being in the middle of a cluster provides a little bit of insulation for them. Clustering on tree trunks, it turns out that tree trunks are hot water bottles, radiating heat out through the butterflies' bodies when temperature drops only last for a short time. So they're sitting on the hot water bottle when it gets really cold. And then clustering at intermediate heights gives them an advantage. And this shows the temperature, this same temperature basically that you saw in the outside when it gets warm during the day, and inside when it gets cold during the night. So that's maximum, minimum, and then inside the forest, only 30 meters away from where this broad variation is occurring, you can see that the temperature during the day and night is greatly moderated beneath the fir trees. So it was quite clear to us that cutting any trees out of those overwintering areas is going to really cause problems with the butterflies because it'll damage the microclimate. Here we put one of these little eye buttons on a wooden rod, and we suspended the rod down through a cluster using a fishing pole and being very, very careful. So there were thermocrons inside the cluster and then one on the stick outside exposed to the night air. And what we found was that the temperature inside the cluster on the coldest part of the day is half a degree to a degree warmer. And during the day, it's 1 or 2 degrees cooler. So in the daytime, they're conserving their fat, and in the night, they're protected from that critical potential of freezing to death if it gets really cold. So then we also found that there were 2 storm periods that occurred, and we calculated the mortality of butterflies that were sitting on the branches. And this is the survival rate of the butterflies. 56% or whatever that reads of them survived on the branches. 78 survived on the tree trunks. And the same thing happened here. It was even colder in this storm. 5% survived on the branches and 43% on the tree trunks during this severe cold drop. So here is the tree trunk. There is the thermal hot water bottle effect, really. And you can see that here. Basically, it shows what you've already seen, and this is the temperature on the tree trunk, and you can see that it's even more moderated than being underneath the forest alone. So that instead of going down to several degrees below freezing, it's never getting much lower than 2 degrees above freezing, and much cooler during the daytime. So by selecting the right trees in the right part of the colony, and as we're going to see now, if you look at this picture, you'll see that the butterflies are avoiding the treetops, and so most of them are about 1/3 of the way down to 2/3 of the way down in the trees. And so we measured the temperature at different heights. We used this monster slingshot and put a rope over the top of the tree about 30 meters up, set the temperature records at every 5-meter intervals and measured the temperature. Here's the measuring device. So we hauled those up the tree. Here you can see them at different 5-meter increments. And what we found was that the butterfly clusters are concentrated in this area of the tree, about the bottom half of the tree. And the temperature on the ground is cold, and it gets warmer as you go up. And the maximum temperature is exactly where the butterfly's mean height is. They're smart guys, these butterflies. They know what part of the forest is going to provide them the safest protection. So, and as you get higher up, not only is it subject to condensation in the treetops, it's also considerably colder. So, by being in the middle part of the trees, they're in the safest part of the colony. So this basically just summarizes what we said. Being under the canopy is umbrella and blanket. Being in the middle of a cluster, they're a little bit warmer. Clustering on tree trunks, same thing, and clustering at intermediate heights. So maintaining the integrity of this forest becomes really important because microclimate really does matter. And the butterflies are obviously highly adapted to it. Well, the microclimate is sensitive to human disturbance, and that we're going to look at now with conservation issues in Mexico. And when we first went down there, we noticed that there's sustenance living in this area, and these people are getting enough firewood to sustain themselves, not having much of an impact on the forest. But it's increased. The number of people that are taking wood out and selling it has been increasing over the years. And even as early as 1981, there were major commercial operations right next to the butterfly area. So we howled and made lots of noise and worked with World Wildlife Fund in Mexico City. And in 1980, the president declared one form of protection which wasn't adequate, and that was it increased to using the concept of national forests and national park to have complete protection of the middle areas where the butterflies were overwintering, and then a buffer area around it. And so this protected 6 or 7 different areas in 1980, but the cutting went on, and here is an example of cutting trees right in the middle of a colony. Here you see the butterflies. And the number of logging operations and lumber operations was going up to a degree which was obviously having a major impact in this area. So we talked with World Wildlife Fund and the government of Mexico, and they said, give us data. We need data. How much deforestation is actually occurring? So we got together a group of GIS people, Geographic Information System geographers, and we measured it. And we went back to 1981, I think this was, showing the forest. The green is intact forest, the yellow is partially disturbed, and the gray is heavily disturbed. And what you can see is as time went on to 1999, that 44% of the high-quality forest was degraded over that time, and this is the butterfly area. You can see the original protected areas. So nothing was being adequately protected, and this resulted in some pretty good conservation measures, went up from 62 square miles basically to a large, much 600, I can't read the number from here. Anyway, it was a big increase in both the core zone and the buffer zone. And here you can see the colonies now, they're all tied together as one unit, pretty much as one unit, and the core area takes in where the colonies were found. As you saw on the last slide, a lot of them were not inside the protected area. So that was a big step ahead. But since then, horse logging has gotten started, and this is sustained logging over a long period of time. And this is the picture that I showed with Kathy Brugger's, pointing the pointer right here. This forest was, when she first saw it in 1975, it was all heavily forested with OML firs. And these have all been horse logged over the course of time. And the butterflies are still going back into this area even though it's heavily logged, and the result is that many more of them are freezing to death because they're not protected by the overstory of the forest. This was an illegal operation that went on in February in the 2005 to 2008, and one of the butterfly colonies had been here, one of the major areas, and the extent of this logging and the rapaciousness of it was really quite extraordinary. So another problem is ecotourism, the negative impacts. Here is one of the major colonies nearest Mexico City, and running horses up and down has deteriorated the environment. And this sign says no more than 20 people will be visiting the sanctuary at a time. And this was what the day we came down. And this day I was actually with President Carter, and we went up to see the butterflies together. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this, again, is ecotourism. Too many people overwhelming the area. This is a big rock right next to the Cerro Chincua colony, and this picture was taken in 80? It's skewed on the sides, makes it hard to see. But anyway, so 1980, and this is 25 years later. The very same rock that you're looking at there, simply by repeated climbing on it by people, has totally destroyed the plant life on that rock. And so this is a subtle example of ecological change that's taking place as a result of ecotourism. Well, some of the good news is Local conservation groups, Altanari, for example, is a group that is training people to be better forest management and more sustained agriculture, and they're teaching people to fish rather than giving them a fish, so to speak, and that has been a very successful operation. And others have worked with reforestation. Here's the head of Altanari, these two ladies, Jose Alvarez, who's a forester, and Jordi Honeyrose, who played a major role in the Mexican World Wildlife Fund. And this is an area that was replanted with trees and is coming back. Once the trees are planted, if the soil hasn't eroded too badly, they come back really fast. And this has been pretty successful. Well, another really interesting issue was that about a year ago in February, we went with President Carter up to see the butterflies. And he's even older than I am. Between the two of the old hobbled characters got up that mountainside. I'm not sure how we did it, but he got there faster than I did. He's an amazing man. He's done so much good for the world, and he was very concerned. And one of the really good news aspects of this is a result of meeting President Carter and his wife that week in Mexico a year ago. We were able to write to Mrs. Carter and ask her to write to Mrs. Obama and ask Mrs. Obama to plant a butterfly garden. And she actually has done this, and it happened about 2 weeks ago. So that was a really interesting side benefit of this wonderful visit with President Carter. I was very impressed by him. Well, now I'm going to talk about loss of milkweeds and nectar sources. Monarchs are associated with milkweeds. They're the only plants they can eat, and even though there are 108 species, most of them are feeding on this, which is the common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. And here they're feeding on not only the caterpillars eating the leaves, but the butterflies are feeding on the nectar, which is copiously produced by these beautiful blossoms. And during the fall migration, goldenrods are really important. Liatris is really important. Lots of fall plants that produce. So nectar is really important so the butterflies can build up their fat reserves to get through the winter. Well, a study done by Wassenaar and Hobson in Canada, published in 1998, they collected monarchs in Mexico, and using isotopes, they were able to determine that 85, what does it say? 50% of the butterflies are breeding in this region, and 95% are breeding in this region here. And the breeding limit is here. So the problem with this is the grassland ecosystem of the United States where there's intense agriculture. And I want to talk about that. And this shows corn for grain in 2004, growing right in the area where the monarch butterfly major reproduction is occurring. And if we look at soybean and corn on this map and see it coincides almost exactly with the principal breeding distribution of the monarch. So it's milkweeds that are growing in this region that are the principal food plant of probably at least half of the butterflies that get to Mexico. Well, here you see milkweeds growing on the edge of a cornfield. I took this picture in Minnesota a few years ago. And this had not been sprayed with anything, so the milkweed, and so you find lots of monarchs laying their eggs on these roadside plants. And in those days, there was lots of milkweed growing in the cornfields as weeds, and monarchs were coming out of those fields in droves. And then spraying with herbicide began, and here you can see a milkweed growing in the cornfield, which has been sprayed and is dying. And I got these pictures from John Pleasance, who's an Iowa biologist. And basically, this is a soybean field with weeds growing, and in it milkweeds as well as grass. And this is a few days after that was sprayed with Roundup. And the soybeans are surviving in the middle, the milkweeds and the grasses are dying. And here you see that milkweed is completely dead after a few days. And what John, he followed 100 and some odd milkweed stems. After they're sprayed in about 2 weeks, they're dying, and by the end of it, most of them are dead. So, and this is an example of a soybean field in Minnesota where I took this picture, and this is nothing but absolute monoculture of soybeans. And the reason it's such a pure growth is because it's been herbicided, and they're genetically engineered plants to resist Roundup. So the plants have been selected to be completely resistant to these toxic chemicals. Plant the seeds of the soybeans or the corn, let them germinate, spray them when they're about 6 inches high, and the soybeans or the corn survive, and everything else is killed, 100% kill, close to 100% kill. So what you see is one weed in this patch, which is probably a genetically engineered corn plant from the previous year. No milkweeds, nothing besides. And so if we look at the history of the size of the overwintering colonies, we plotted a regression line through these data, which is a highly significant decline over this 21-year period. And it's been going down precipitously in the last few years. And this past winter, the smallest number of butterflies were overwintering in Mexico, and going back to 1975 when we have the first crude records. But we have good records of the total area occupied by butterflies with some fluctuation. The average is about 6 hectares, and this year it was down to less than 1 hectare. Really scary decline. And my good friends at Monsanto are not going to like this slide very much, but what it shows is the use of glyphosate, which is Roundup, and how it's increased over the period from 1998 until the present. And this is the pattern of monarch loss during that time. And there's a pretty strong correlation between the decline in milkweed numbers as measured in Mexico and the increasing use of these herbicides. So I think it's a really serious problem that Monsanto, and I hope we can address it with Monsanto and come to some kind of a resolution. We need to compromise because it's, in my opinion, it's a much bigger issue than just monarch butterflies and milkweeds. It's biodiversity in general being wiped out by this chemical agriculture on a scale that's just getting out of hand, is already out of hand. And here we come to the end of my talk, and these beautiful butterflies, and we just hope that this endangered phenomenon is going to come around and survive. And maybe we may not see it, but nature is resilient. I have to end on a good note here, and the students are going to bring us around. We hope that today's students are tomorrow's problem solvers. We've had a lot of great kids working with us over the years, great colleagues over the years, great other graduate students over the years, and conservation colleagues all over the place. It's been a great life, and I thank everybody so very much for helping with it, and thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
We have a special presentation for Dr. Brower tonight. The World Ecology Center recognizes persons who do great efforts for conservation all over the world in 2 different ways. One way is we bestow the World Ecology Medal to persons who are well known around the world and contribute to conservation. People like John Denver, who was our first recipient, Jacques Cousteau, Jane Goodall, Peter Rabin. But we also bestow the Harris Conservation Action Prize Award, and we've done this less often, and we'd like to bestow that on Dr. Brower tonight for his efforts behind the scenes to help protect the monarch butterfly and to promote its conservation throughout its range. He seems like a very nice guy, very low-key, but he has really done a lot behind the scenes. He really brought the Mexican, 3 different administrations of the Mexican government to declare proclamations to protect the butterfly in its natural range. So for that, I would like to present you with this award.
Thank you very much. Wow, that is really nice. Thank you so much. That is lovely. Thank you very much. Very sweet. You're welcome. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you
That's
very
really nice.
So to close the evening, I would like to thank you very much for coming, and we have refreshments upstairs, so please join us up there.
Thank you. Thank you. Really nice. Look at this. How about this, huh?